That's right, folks. Come for the provocative intro. Stay to nerd out on fantasy baseball with me. Coming to you live from the closet of my office, as to not disturb my wife, child, and 10-pound weenie dog. This is Mark S., and I'm here to talk fantasy baseball game theory with you. I can't believe you're here for this inaugural episode. What a treat. I'm really just kind of looking for a space to talk fantasy baseball, because really, you don't have many of those in the public, so you turn to the internet. It used to be a thing that you would kind of share on Twitter a little bit more, but people don't really interact that way anymore, so this is kind of where we landed. A little bit about me. I mainly play 12-team leagues on NFBC. I do NFBC 15s as well. I play in Earth, so I'm a turf manager as well. I mainly do NFBC 50s. Those are probably my jam. I know that's entry-level stuff for most people, but that's kind of where my favorite place lies to play. I mean, the off-season's really what I live for. I know maybe that's weird. Maybe it's not. I feel like I'm not alone out here, where the off-season is just kind of your time to dream. I know maybe that doesn't sound like someone who wins very much. I swear I'm not bad. I'm not going to sit here and claim that I'm the greatest player of all time. I am no robot. I am no insert NFBC legend here. I am just a guy in his closet talking fantasy baseball with you all. So thank you for joining me. A little bit about what I think this is going to be about, I hope at least. I'm not going to go too far into deep dives with players. I feel like those are covered pretty much all across the board. So I wanted to kind of keep this more about the game theory, more about the approach to drafting, more about the strategy within the draft, within building your team, kind of analyzing the player pool at more of a macro level as opposed to those individual deep dives, which I think so many people do such a great job of. And honestly, that's not really my cup of tea. As I said before, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert here. I really am just looking to kind of fill the void with fantasy baseball talk. I think you can look up my record on some of those public sites. I'm not a bad player. I'm not a great player. I'm not going to, I've never played in a main event. That's kind of the goal. That's really, when I think about competing, I think about entering in the Champions League. Shout out to Toby. You're going to hear me shout out probably a lot of other fantasy baseball influencers and podcasters in this. I'm a big fan. I listen to a lot of the content that gets put out, maybe too much at times. I think people who do that can understand. The hope here is to just kind of talk about the game theory itself. So with that in mind, I thought we would jump in because as the Bat X gets released and the Bat gets released, it is officially chaos season. Chaos season is upon us. When I think of chaos season, I think of basically the time that projections start to come out, although Steamer really comes out earlier and earlier every year. So the Bat X just released and the Bat just released as well. Ariel Cohen and ATC are going to be soon to follow shortly. So what that does is it really sets early ADP into a tailspin. So you've got months of ADP that's been built up from gladiators and early DCs, and these are hardcore players. So as soon as these projection comes out, you know that these players are going to go start taking a deep dive and looking at some of the standouts and some of the things that are places that you can gain an edge almost instantly. So, maybe you're going in to confirm some of your early thoughts. Maybe you're going in looking for players that you don't believe in to see if your thoughts are correct. This is a chance. This is the first time I think we see the ADP really start to kind of flip on its head. There's not really much to change that early drafting, especially with Steamer coming out early now. So we've had a few months of kind of, stagnant data, if you will. And the Bat X is the first big kind of shakeup. Some other groups are starting to release their projections and their standings as well. So this is a time for you to kind of start to take your guys and kind of start to plant your flags for the first time. If you don't, you're gonna kind of get left in the dust. So as the ADP gets less predictable, especially if you're in draft and hold leagues, you're starting to think about, if you're playing chicken, all of a sudden you might not find that you're the low guy on any players. I think of a few players in particular when I'm looking at the BATX and kind of looking at some spreadsheets that I just put together with those standings. The first one that comes to mind was Xander Bogaerts. I saw he jumped up to like a top 100 player, based on my spreadsheet projections. And I should clarify here. So what I'm talking about, I'm using Tanner Bell's spreadsheet, which is one of the many tools that I utilize. I'll try and call out some of the different tools and kind of the different ways that I utilize them. I think it's important to kind of have a wide tool chest and not really stick to one particular thing. I like to think that it gives me a bit of a different perspective when I switch from one tool to the next. So it just kind of makes for, it gives me a different insight. And sometimes I can see, even if I'm in a draft room, I feel like I can pick up when people are using certain projection systems and certain rankings. So it gives you a little bit of an edge there if you know that someone is kind of leaning on a certain system. So, I started putting my spreadsheet together actually today, I'm sure much to the chagrin of my wife, and it was because the BATX came out. So, some of the people that I started scrolling through, because I'm midway through a 50 right now, Xander Bogaerts was the one who stood out to me. So, showing up as a top 100 player, he's a boring veteran. It's like, is this a guy that you want to plant a flag in, quote? I don't think that's what you're necessarily doing, but if suddenly other people are realizing this might be a huge value, a huge buying opportunity, you might want to jump them up a little bit. So it's this game of cat and mouse that's suddenly developing after the data was stagnant for a few weeks. So I think it gives you a really interesting opportunity if you're in a draft and hold room, or if you're in an early draft room, to, if you get spreadsheets and if you set up your, if you are a analytics guy, if you are a projections guy, that's what I'm looking for. We're new at this, folks. If you're a projections guy, this is kind of your Christmas as the BATX and ATC come out. So I think we're going to see a lot of change of ADP in the coming weeks here. So how can you take advantage of it? So I used Xander Bogaerts as an example earlier. I think you are immediately looking, especially if you're in a draft right now, you are immediately going to start looking at some of the discrepancies, trying to find those buying opportunities, trying to find those guys to fade is, I think, even more important than the buying opportunities, because you're looking for someone that you want to cut from your draft list. You're looking for the people that you don't want to think about anymore. I like to kind of make the player pool shrink a little bit. Everybody's different there, but I think there are just so many players and there are so many ways to bake these cakes that I think if you can eliminate people with certainty from your draft prep, it makes it a little bit more easier for you to get along. So I think you're looking for those buying opportunities. You're looking for those selling opportunities. You're making sure that you've got your league settings correct. So I mentioned I was setting up my spreadsheets earlier. You want to make sure that if you're doing an NFBC 50, that you're looking at 12 team data versus 15 team data. I think that's very important. I think even the little things like setting up your position rankings, making sure that one position is more valuable than the other. All of these things will make your data speak to you differently and give you different interpretations of what the draft room should look like. And of course, it's still so early, right? So I mentioned it was chaos season because of projections, but we have so many guys who haven't even signed. I mean, Kyle Tucker hasn't even found a home yet. So what are you going to do with players like that? These guys notoriously slip in the draft until they become, until they get signed. So suddenly you create, there's just all these, it's just chaos. I mean, it's chaos. That's what we're going for. So, I think this is a great time to draft, not just draft and holds, but even OCs. I think this is a great chance to kind of take advantage of the market. If you're listening to a podcast like this from a nobody on January 3rd, which is when I recorded this, I mean, you're in the deep of it. So I think this is a chance for someone like you to really take advantage of someone who is just getting off of football season, and is just kind of getting their feet wet. So, I would encourage you to jump into the draft rooms. I promise this is not an NFBC sponsored segment, but it just seems like a great time for those diehards, for the folks that are really into this, to kind of take advantage of what's available to them, and the information that is kind of reaching a crescendo and clashing at the same time. FBGT. So we've talked a lot about projections, but I think it's probably important to bring up that for anyone who maybe isn't as experienced with projections, they go through a lot of variations and changes over time, especially in the early going. So I think of the bat, which is, again, the kind of shout out to Derek Carty. He is the influence behind me recording an episode. So, I appreciate you for kind of pushing me over the edge here to get into this. But, his projection system is going to change. I believe I don't want to put words in his mouth. This is not fact, but I believe he relies on ATC or works with ATC for playing time projections, and playing time projections are going to change and get tweaked from now until basically the season starts and beyond. So if you are looking at projections right now as fact, you're doing it wrong. They're going to change significantly. We talked about free agents still in flux. We talked about, there's so many positions and teams that are still in flux around the diamond. So you want to be careful leaning on projections too much. And you want to make sure that you are interpreting the data, that you're looking at the playing time projections, you're looking at the at-bats, making sure that the data that's influencing your decisions is correct. And if you're not, you're looking at fan graphs, you're looking at, roster resource depth charts, you're taking advantage of the information that's available to you right now. You want to be careful on the pitching side. Like, for instance, the bat right now doesn't have saves, which I believe will get tweaked over time. I don't remember if they did saves last year. It's understandable. It's a bit of a crapshoot to project those. It's manager dependent as much as anything. So, you want to be careful that you don't know why you haven't drafted any relievers, and it's because the projection system you're using accidentally doesn't have saves. You just want to be careful. The chaos can work inversely, I guess, as well, with that in mind. All right, so we talked about what makes chaos season just so ridiculous, but how do we take advantage of it? What I like to do is use my spreadsheet. Again, I'm using Tanner Bell's spreadsheet in this particular purpose. I like to immediately go ahead and create a draft list in NFBC based on what my spreadsheet's cumulative rankings are. So you can do this by downloading a ranking sheet from NFBC when you're in the custom draft, when you're creating your custom lists. I download a list and I kind of use that as my default, my default location. And then I take my combined rankings from Tanner Bell's sheet. And it's just important, you need to add a column that adds the NFBC player ID, and that's what makes the two kind of marry to one another. And then you just need to make sure that you remove some of the defaults. For instance, Shohei Ohtani always kind of throws an error bar. And if you copy like your whole rankings, like all 2,000 players, the NFBC doesn't have a lot of them registered. So I usually cap it at like 600 players for my NFBC 50s. And so you're able to import your cumulative rankings based on your spreadsheet, based on your inputs, and it gives you a completely different view of the draft room almost instantly. So I've already used Xander Bogaerts as an example. I'm just going to keep going back to it because it's the easy one at the top of my head. As soon as I ran that spreadsheet through and then I uploaded it to NFBC, I was in round like 15 of an NFBC 50. And that's where, he popped up. Aaron Nola popped up on the pitching side. He was one of the last kind of remaining people in the top 150 or so. A few other people popped up. Otto Lopez popped up. I know Rob DiPietro is a big fan of him. I shouldn't say big fan, but I know he's spoken, his name before. So, you know, I'm in the middle of a draft. I'm at pick like 215 or so. And I've got people, according to my sheet, that are ranking in the top 100. So I'm immediately profiting, right in the middle of a draft. I'm applying these draft rankings almost instantaneously to drafts that are happening in real time. So I encourage people to really try that. I don't think a lot of people take advantage of that particular side of the tool chest. I don't know, whatever you want to call it, some sort of thing that holds tools. But I think it's a really great opportunity for you to kind of customize the NFBC software, and make it work for you in a way that's a little bit different than everybody else. Ryan Bloomfield from Bubba and the Bloom, they talked about in one of their more recent podcasts, a way to make it so that you can import the ADP using, the most recent ADP, so that you have a way of looking at the draft from an ADP perspective. You can also import, like a Steamer depth charts, or a Fangraphs depth charts, or Steamer 600. So you have all these different lists and ways to look at the player pool as you kind of go further along. I don't use the latter too often, but it always intrigues me for the draft and holds in the NFBC 50s. Like uploading Steamer 600 as a standalone list that you can kind of use when they're off, the first 400 players are off the board. So you don't really care how it's sorting at that point. You're just looking for anyone to kind of pop. So, this is, again, as more of this data starts to come loose, you can create all these different looks in the draft room, and you can do this using their standard software. So you don't have to kind of plug into your own spreadsheet and, bounce between one piece of data from the other, especially if you're drafting on the go or whatnot. So that's something that I like to do. Like I said, I did it right away, and it was immediately helping me in one of my drafts earlier today. FBGT. The other thing I like to do is, sometimes you feel pressure in slow drafts to draft as quick as you possibly can. I think people use it as a bit of a bragging point to put themselves on auto, if I'm being honest. I mean, it's the same couple hundred people in the NFBC draft room, so I think there's a little bit of peacocking at times. But I think it's important to take advantage of this time to prep. And so when you're in a slow draft, it's okay to take the time to populate a spreadsheet, to, fill out a sheet of a draft tracker, or fill out a sheet with everybody's teams in a draft tracker, so that you can start to kind of get a lay of the land. I can't imagine anyone's actually doing a big money draft right now. I think a lot of us who are really into this are just kind of using this as our warm-up time. So, do that. Use this as your warm-up time. I know we're putting money into these things, especially 50s. I mean, it's nothing to scoff at, but it does give you a chance to kind of flex your wings, to kind of try new things. I like to, try different strategies. I know I'm not alone there. People do these in DCs, they do these in 50s. So, I just think this is your chance to, see different builds. Plug into your sheet if you're looking at 3 different players, plug all 3 players into the sheet and see what they do to your team, see what they do to the standings. It helps you track those decision paths for when the time actually matters. And it also helps you from getting into kind of that stale mindset where you're constantly walking down the same path. If you're plugging in these different players, if you're thinking about the different paths that you can take, that gives you more of a framework later down the line when you're really in your drafts, when you're really in the thick of them. When you're at your home draft and the ADP doesn't go the way you want it because no one actually looks at anything until 1 week before. You have thought about things. So I like to do that a lot with my slow drafts. I know sometimes maybe it's to the chagrin of others. I'm not advocating that you be the slowest person. I'm not saying take the full 2 hours, which is usually what I do. 2 hours is usually the time frame that I like to do. Shout out to those 25 or so of us that are kind of rotating through a few drafts on the NFBC 50 circuit there. So, yeah, I think you just want to really use this opportunity to prep yourself and get ready for some of your big money drafts that are probably coming up in the future. All right, so we're about 20 minutes in. I think these are probably going to be about 30 minutes or so. And I wanted to kind of wrap up with what I'm going to call candy. Quick thoughts from a random drafter that I thought would just be sweet little nuggets to end the show. So in the spirit of the Bad X coming out, I wanted to call out another player that I saw on there. So they haven't given up on JTR. Granted, we're talking about the catcher boost, so it's not like we're talking about someone who's like a top 50 player anymore in the player pool. But I thought it was interesting that they still have him down for, I think, a 260 average when I last looked. Fangraphs depth charts and Steamer had him for a lot lower. So I think it just gives you one more year to try it. I'm not talking about building your catcher strategy around him, but I had waited on catcher in this league that I've been talking about. And I was targeting him as my catcher one that I was going to quickly pair with someone like Austin Wells. It's nothing sexy. It's not particularly glamorous, especially with all those great catcher options that are happening earlier. But in this particular draft, I wanted to try. I actually went 6 pitchers in a row in the middle after 4 bats to start. And so I thought it was, I didn't really prioritize catcher in that particular build. And he was going to be someone that I was going to take at the end there, but unfortunately someone got him from me on the turn. So I think I'm going to go back to Ryan Jeffers. I think he's going to be kind of my guy to try and pair with either Austin Wells or Logan O'Hoppe and just pray that the average isn't that bad. Speaking of average not being that bad, I thought it was really interesting that Murakami, I'm not going to try and pronounce his first name. I'm sorry. I'm not that much of a professional yet here. I thought it was interesting that even with a projected like 210 average on the Bad X, he was still a top 115 player according to my spreadsheet. I mean, that's mainly driven by the fact that he had 30 plus home runs, and I think I saw 11 steals in there. So, that's a pretty significant output from someone who right now is going after the 200 turn. Obviously, I think there's so much variance to be considered here because we're not talking about MLB data that's going into those projections. We're talking about, data from overseas. So it's going to be very noisy. But again, you're looking for opportunities to try and find power late, which I think people are really starting to prioritize based on what I've heard on other podcasts. Obviously, this gives you a great opportunity to do that without a 0 in steals. You're just taking a huge negative on the average side. So you'll want to make sure that, maybe you're pairing him with a Chandler Simpson or something like that to make the, to take 2 slots on your roster to make 2 milquetoast players. But it's interesting that even with such a low average, that power stands out in the projections. All right, folks, I think that's going to do it for this first episode of FBGT. Thank you so much for listening in. Again, I'm not really sure what the future holds here. I think if I was really putting on my thinking cap, this might be something that I keep along, for the off season. I don't really envision getting too crazy. I'm not doing this for money. I'm not doing this for clout or anything. Honestly, it really was just an opportunity for me to stand up with a microphone in my face for a little bit and talk about fantasy baseball. So thank you if you've made it this far. I really appreciate you listening. I hope you found this information insightful. Again, the goal here is not going to be to get too in depth on the player theory, or the player reviews. I think there's so much great content out there already on that front, but I think there's a little bit of an opportunity for more people to just kind of talk about the game of fantasy baseball. I mentioned before, I think I'm going to have a little bit of Yahoo talk in here. I want to talk about ADP discrepancies between Yahoo and NFBC. I'm not going to talk crazy about the 15s, but I'm not going to forget about them either. I think this is going to be more about 10s and 12s, which I think will kind of resonate with others a little bit more. So that's kind of the plan right now. It's very much in flux. There might be a video element at some point. I might actually make these, I was actually really proud of the intro. I kind of sat there with an IPA in my hand and, had some fun with it. But we'll see. Maybe we'll polish it up a little bit. I appreciate everybody kind of taking the time. We'll probably have some guests in the future as well if we get that far. We'll see. I don't want to put the cart too far before the horse, but Thanks again for taking the opportunity to check it out. This has been FBGT. This is Mark S. Have a great night, everyone.